Liam of Carcanne. Chapter 8. Troll. Part 1. Nothing in Liam's time on his high school track team had prepared him for the run he and Nori made back to the lumberjacks' camp. There was no number of hurdles, no amount of sprints, no cross-country runs that could recreate running for your life, especially not running for your life through the woods from a giant rock monster. The two men ran along the creek as far as they could before the thin banks forced them into the water. Caring nothing for the noise they made, they splashed their way north until they came to the original tunnel. Rejoining land, they clambered up the side of the creek and resumed their run into the woods. Long after the panic had bled from their bodies and their paces slowed, they continued to run side by side, the presence of one pushing the other forward. Deep in the confines of the forest, as far from the creek as possible, Nori finally stumbled to a stop. His hand caught a nearby tree for support before doubling over and gasping for breath. Liam paused a few paces away, jogging in place for a moment before bending backwards to open his lungs. He kept his eyes ahead of them, too afraid to turn back and see the creature giving chase. "I think," Nori stopped to gasp, "I think we outran it." Why do you think that?" The words came out stilted, broken up by pauses for breath. "If we hadn't," Nori stood and leaned his back against the tree, "we'd be dead already." "Do you think that's what happened to Otto?" Liam finally forced his gaze back the way they came. There was no sign of the beast, but there was also no sign of their hunter friend. "It's bad luck to talk about such things on the job," Nori chastised his mentee half-heartedly. "But no, Otto got away. He'll catch up eventually if he isn't already ahead of us." "Good." Liam twisted at the waist as he spoke. "I was getting worried." "Worry about us?" Nori pushed himself off of the tree and turned to face back down the trail. "We're not out of the woods yet." A lukewarm smile spread across his face, causing Liam to shake his head before the two took off down the tunnel at a fast jog. The two adventurers set a brisk pace through the forest as they jogged back towards the camp. Not stopping to rest again, it was another half an hour before the broken trees at the mouth of the shaft came into view. It was here, rounding the corner back to the site of the last attack, that Nori and Liam finally slowed their pace. "I guess we know what the hatchet stuck in the tree is all about now," Liam said, stepping back into the clearing. "What's that?" Nori stopped to look at the tool, still stuck into a tree some 10 feet in the air. "Someone must have lobbed it at that thing." Liam paused alongside him. "They must have thrown it pretty damn hard to stick in a tree that high up." Nori and Liam both jumped at the sudden sound of a third voice. With his nerves still on edge, Liam grabbed the handle of his sword and turned to the source of the words. Nori wasted no time in mirroring his actions. "Whoa, wait a minute!" Otto yelled at the two, stepping out from the darkness between two trees with raised palms. "Oh, thank the goddess." Nori's shoulders dropped, and Liam returned the half of his sword he had drawn into its sheath. "Where the hell have you been?" "I'm happy to see you too." The adventurer dropped his hands and crossed the clearing. Relief flooded Liam's system at the sight of his missing friend. Nori wasted no time pulling his partner into a quick hug, followed by successive slaps on the back. The two had been through much together during their time working alongside one another. Both were pleased that hadn't included death by rock monster. As happy as everyone was to be reunited, Otto's return failed to renew the group's good spirits. The tension from their escape lingered over the party long after stepping back onto the path back to camp, keeping mouths shut and eyes scanning the trees as they walked. The journey back into camp took them past the early sunset of the Duisdawn forest, saving them from a public walk of shame to their tent. Those few they did pass scurried away from their filthy clothes and worn expressions with looks of concern stretched on their faces. Despite the cloak of darkness, it wouldn't be long before word spread of their return, and Astor or Lord Alwyn would appear to hear their account of the day. What the hell was that thing? The dam holding back the emotion from the group's escape finally shattered as the flap of their tent fell into place behind them. "Not a damn hobgoblin!" Nori stripped the vambrace from his arm and slung it at the side of the tent. The fabric wall billowed outward, robbing him of the satisfying noise it would have made in a proper building. "It's my fault." Otto bit into the leather of a glove and ripped it from his hand before spitting it to the floor. The other he tore off with his freed hand and threw against the wall opposite Nori's vambrace. There had to be tracks in the tunnels. He continued to condemn himself, seeming to forget his companions were present. There's no excuse for my missing them. Don't be so hard on yourself. Nori's shaking fingers fumbled with the clasp of the armor on his other arm. Troll tracks are not the kind of thing you run into every day. Troll? Liam paused, his glove already stripped and one vambrace on his cot. A troll? He repeated. They're real? Otto and Nori shared an exhausted look before turning it on Liam. Of course trolls are real, Nori answered, his second arm finally coming free of its protection. I know Kieran's told you at least one troll story. What did you think? That he and the others were making them up? Otto stripped off his chest rig. The more layers he removed, the more anger and frustration leaked into the air. I don't know. I figured they were telling tales to scare the new guy. Liam shrugged and raised his arms. His mouth worked open and closed before he continued. Like a hazing ritual or something. I mean, come on. A giant monster that builds itself out of rocks it finds? It's more than a little far-fetched. It's also true. Nori finished stripping the armor from his upper body and took a seat on the edge of his cot. A troll is one of the most dangerous things you can be called on to deal with as an adventurer. It's not a joke. Our business is too dangerous to be wasting time confusing initiates with tall tales. Wow, that's just living rocks? Liam sat down on the edge of his bed and rubbed at his face. So far, all of the magic he had seen had made some semblance of sense. But living rocks? That's just crazy. No, it's not. Otto stared at the back of the tent flap, his eyes unfocused. What is crazy? His eyes squinted, and his brow furrowed as he tugged off his undershirt. What is crazy is mistaking a pile of living rock for hobgoblins. Otto's legs jolted, and he surged to the flap of their tent, his posture growing more tense with every step. Throwing the flap open, he charged out into the open air of the camp. Otto, don't do anything stupid, Nori warned through the canvas. Oh, don't worry. The adventurer's head reappeared through the flap, the center of his brow sharp and his nostrils flaring. I'm just out to educate. I'm going to explain the difference between a hobgoblin and a troll to a few backwoods, plow-brained woodsmen. The volume of his voice exploded as he reached the insults, ensuring anyone nearby heard every word he said. Shouldn't take more than a minute. If a fabric door could slam, this one would have. As it was, Otto closed the flap with such force, the sound of a towel snapping filled the room and the entire tent shook. Liam sat, staring after the usually calm hunter, mouth agape. The problem with Otto is, he lets everything fester too long, Nori explained to Liam. So when he does finally get worked up, he blows up big. He mimicked an explosion with his hands. There was a long pause as the tense energy drained from the room in the wake of Otto's sudden departure. All right then. Trolls? Nori bent over and began unlacing his long boots, missing Liam's nod. Well, for starters, we don't have them in Mandrote. It's the heat, you see. They prefer cooler climes, especially if there's a lot of rocks and stone around. It's cool in these woods, but they really like it where there's lots of snow. Rhodes Pinion, the country in the mountains to the north, is supposed to be full of them. He pulled a foot up to his lap and started working on removing his shoe. No one really knows where they come from or how they're born, just that they assemble themselves out of the rocks they find when they come to exist. According to Kieran, there are people who can tell where they've come from by the rocks their bodies are made from. I doubt they could do that with one made of wood. That's pretty rare, huh? Like Otto said, I've never even heard a tall tale about a wooden troll before. I suppose it's not impossible. If there's not as much rock around, it'd make sense they'd use the next best thing. Part of the problem is there's just not much known about them, and those who are the experts in the guild live pretty solitary lives, spending much of their time hunting them up in the backcountry. You'd need to seek them out to learn much of anything, if they tell you. And since most of us will never have to deal with one, most adventurers simply don't. How do you know so much about them? Liam asked, setting the last of his armor on the cot beside him. I don't. Nori shook his head. Just general knowledge, really. The guild only allows gold ranks and higher to deal with them. A silver can't even ride in a gold's wagon to help with the job. See, they're basically immortal. They have no natural predators in the wild, and there's no mundane way to kill one. Their rocks are tougher than average stone. You have to use pretty specific high-powered spells to damage rock, let alone living rock. Like the one you cast before we ran? A hopeful look crossed Liam's face, but it fell off again when Nori shook his head. No, not even close. Nori returned his attention to his boot. That was a light show and some loud noise to cover our retreat. Confuse it a bit, maybe blind it for a while, but it didn't do any permanent damage. Otto and I were buying time. only keeping it busy until one of us could grab you and we could make a run for it. We knew we had no chance of doing any real damage to living stone. Well, Liam sighed, his brow wrinkling. What do we do now? For now, Nori asked, taking off his boot and tossing it under his cot. We find Otto and make sure he hasn't strangled anyone. Nori reached over and patted Liam on the foot before rising from his cot. After that, dinner. Dragging us out here under false pretenses? Are you aware of what happens to people who try to bait and switch the guild? The sound of Otto's voice carried over the crowd of lumberjacks that had formed around him. The torches and lanterns they wielded bounced warm light off of the sea of canvas tents surrounding them, making them easy to find. Immediately, Nori and Liam began pushing their way past the crowd to reach their friend. Now you wait a minute. Aster did his best to stand his ground in front of the menacing glare of the enraged hunter. If you're implying we did this on purpose. Not implying, Otto cut him off. Accusing. Flat out stating. Signs of hobgoblins in the area, your paperwork said. Evidence would be supplied, your boss said. You know what I haven't seen, Aster? Aster opened his mouth as if to speak, before snapping it shut again. I haven't seen a single sign of a hobgoblin band, but I have seen a damned troll. Are you sure it wasn't a hobgoblin? Arlie stood just off the shoulder of the lumber foreman, his meek presence going unnoticed by Otto until this point. You think I don't know what a hobgoblin looks like? Otto turned his ire on the young attendant. His feet carried him towards the boy, forcing him to stumble backwards as he tried to speak. Otto didn't stop until his back met with the ring of onlookers. I never said that, the teenager stuttered as Nori and Liam broke through the ring of people behind Otto. Yes, you did, Otto insisted, turning to point back the way they came. Just over there. You know how I know it wasn't a hobgoblin? Arlie didn't have time to open his mouth before Otto answered the question for him. Because it was a goddess-damned troll. For the first time in the few months Liam had known Otto, he was losing his temper. Though he felt bad for Arlie, he was glad it wasn't him on the receiving end. So what if it was a troll? A random lumberjack's voice sprung up from the crowd. Yeah, what does that change? Another one joined in. We're paying you good money either way. The crowd murmured with activity after the final voice spoke out from somewhere behind Liam. If it is a troll, a familiar mass pushed its way through the crowd. What does it change? We still need it killed. We still need to be safe. The self-aggrandized presence of Lord Alwyn pushed its way into the clearing, willfully ignorant that all he had done was repeat what his employees had already said. Not if. Nori stepped to the center of the ring as he spoke. It is a troll, a decent-sized one at that. Do you have any proof to back this claim? How do we know you're not simply trying to take advantage of us? Trying to up your rates by claiming some simple hobgoblins are something they are not. Lord Yori Alwyn turned to the crowd, raising his hands in challenge of the adventurer's assertions. We're still waiting for the proof of the hobgoblins you promised us yesterday. Otto pushed back against the Lord's words. We're not the ones trying to change the contract. His response was calm, dismissing the veracity of their claim with no more than a shrug of his shoulders. Where are the bodies of the hobs killed in the attacks? Otto continued. We never said any hobgoblins were killed. Our men were taken from us in ambushes. They had no time to defend themselves. And the hobgoblins left no weapons behind? Not a single club or knife? Nori joined his partner in arguing against the overly dressed man. You expect us to keep such horrid things? Where you come from, such trophies might be the norm. But here, among good, honest, goddess-loving people, such vile things are burned. The upturned expression of false disgust that Lord Alwyn painted across his face made Liam's eyes roll. The bodies. Nori turned to address the crowd. The ones you all buried before we got here. How were they mutilated? Had they been sliced and shredded? Or were they crushed, flattened out like a great stone weight had been dropped on them? Another murmur spread through the crowd as the assembly turned to look among its members. There's no way to know now. Lord Alwyn turned a full circle, staring down his lumberjacks. Several men averted their eyes, Aster and Arlie included. As you said, they've already been buried. The condescending smile that crossed the Lord's face rankled Liam. He was acting like he had already won the argument, like the existence of the troll was disproven because of some dirt thrown over the evidence. Then we dig them up, Liam challenged the man. All at once, the air sucked out of the clearing, and all eyes fell on him. You what? Lord Alwyn slowly turned his gaze on the young adventurer, his voice falling quiet with the rest of the crowd. We dig them up, Liam repeated loudly, missing the turn in his surroundings. Nori cut a hand across his neck and shook his head, but Liam squinted at him in confusion, catching the gesture a moment too late. "You would desecrate graves?" Disgust dripped from the Lord's words as his bulk turned to face Liam in full. The marked difference between the real thing and the outlandish performance of only moments earlier was intense. His nose wrinkled and his lips curled back, all while his head tipped away from Liam. "Interrupt someone in their walk? Just to prove you're right?" Liam looked from Nori, who watched his apprentice with a kind of morbid fascination, to Otto, whose face mirrored that of the De Valheran lords. He aimed his gaze back at the rich man. "You've made it clear the only evidence you left intact was the bodies of your men. If that's the case then, in order for either of us to prove we're right, we have to see the bodies. The only way to do that is to dig them up." He doubled down. "I'd rather die than win such a petty contest in such a loathsome manner." The skin around one of the Lord's eyes twitched, and his nostrils flared as he snapped. Liam thought he spotted a bit of green spreading to his cheeks. "Remember that one," Liam thought to himself as he looked around the ring, feeling the twist in the atmosphere for the first time. Graves aren't just hollowed in Carcanne. They're sacred. The crowd began to murmur again. Liam couldn't make out the words that were being said, but whatever it was had Nori by his side in a flash. Liam looked for a single friendly face in the men and women surrounding them, and found none. So quickly their time here had gone from standard job to powder keg, and Liam was beginning to see he might have unwittingly struck a match. "The bodies won't matter," Otto spoke. The anger in his face from earlier condensed down into a soft, calm tone. "When we kill the troll." His words made Nori's head snap back to his partner. Liam's brow furrowed as he looked to the hunter, and the murmur of the crowd grew. Otto's own face was a mask of anger, his eyes staying glued to Liam as he spoke. "If you can kill it," Lord Alwyn seethed, the muscles in his face twitching as though he might retch, "then kill it. I'll pay you accordingly for whatever corpse it is you produce." "Deal." Otto stepped towards the man with an outstretched hand. Nori watched, shaking his head, as Lord Yori Alwyn shook hands with Otto of Stassen. As soon as their hands parted, Lord Alwyn turned and stormed from the circle, Arlie at his heels. "What in the hell are you doing?" Nori drew close to his partner as the crowd around them began to disintegrate. "Are you trying to get us killed?" "I could ask him the same question." Otto motioned toward Liam as he approached. "What?" Liam's brows lifted and his face relaxed. His hands lifted out in front of him. "Dig?" Otto caught his voice carrying and lowered its volume. "Dig up the graves? Are you mad?" "I wasn't aware it was going to be such a big deal." Liam looked around the mass of people now meandering back to their tents. There were plenty fighting the flow of people to stay in their spots, still staring at the young adventurer, whispering and talking among themselves. "We need to get out of here." Nori had looked around the camp, his countenance the same as it had been walking the tunnels into the woods. When no one budged, he placed a hand on Otto's back and pushed him in the direction of their tent. "Wasn't aware." Otto's feet began to move in the direction Nori indicated as he spoke. "Amnesia or not, that can't be the excuse you use the rest of your life. Saying things like that can get you Otto was cut off by the sudden appearance of Aster blocking their path. The camp foreman's eyes were sunken, and his cheeks flushed. "We don't want any trouble, Aster," Nori said, stepping between the man and Liam. "We just want to do our job and get home safe." Aster stepped aside to let them pass. "You were right," he whispered to the group as they walked by. "The bodies were crushed. Lord Alwyn had them buried immediately to keep it quiet. He threatened the men who did it to hide it from the rest of the camp. He said he refused to allow the goblins to cause any undue panic." Otto came to a stop and turned on Aster. "You're only saying this now?" "Lord Alwyn owns the writ of harvest for the woods near my hometown." "He wouldn't be petty enough to—" Otto started. "Yeah, he would." Aster cut him off. "He wouldn't shut it down. He'd lose money. But he'd make it hell for my people." The foreman turned to walk with the men as they made their way back to their tent. "Look, we thought it was Hobbs when we sent the request to the guild. I know trees, not monsters, and we don't get much of this sort of thing in Bosagwal. Lord Yori said the crushed bodies could still be a sign of hobgoblins." "Why would you believe that, coming from someone like him?" Nori shook his head. "He knows a thing or two about monsters." Aster glanced back behind the group. "You wouldn't know it looking at him, but Yori Alwyn was a sergeant in the Regiments Royal before the Valherans got their hooks into him." "Well, then he won't be able to feign ignorance when the fallout from his antics comes," Otto grumbled, his temper having cooled none as they walked. "That's a mighty big if." He may be pompous, but he manages to walk the tightrope between Royce Castle and Steenwood better than most. That makes him valuable to both. Astor stopped and let the three others continue towards their camp. Look, trolls or Alwyn, be careful, and good luck. Now you, Otto turned his attention back to Liam the second the flap closed behind them. I get that you're not from around here. I get that you don't remember your past life. But if you ever, and I mean ever, try and leverage the dead like that again, so help me, Otto raised a hand to strike Liam. He let it hang in the air for a moment, before letting it drop back to his side. A blast of hot air shot from his nostrils, and he pushed past the younger man on his way to his cot. Liam remained glued to the spot, his face pale as he stared at the tent flap. Arlie got off lucky, he realized. We do not interrupt the journey of our dead to their afterlives. Norrie rested a hand on Liam's shoulder. The unexpected contact made him jump. Uncovering their bodies calls their souls back. They may get lost along the way. It's a risk we don't take, for any reason. Got it, Liam whispered before nodding his understanding. Norrie patted his shoulder again before turning his attention on his partner, who sat, trying to force his temper back into whatever steel trap he locked it away in. As for you, what the hell were you thinking telling the loggers we can just run off and kill a troll? I had to do something. Otto looked up to Norrie, his head tilting to one side. Alwyn was going to have Liam strung up if I didn't. No, he wasn't. Liam dismissed Otto's assertion as he turned to face the others. The look on their faces changed his mind. Yeah, annoyance with Liam's inability to read the situation crept into even Norrie's voice, and the crowd would have drank to the health of the hangman afterward. Don't push the religious. Liam filed away yet another useful tidbit. So, distraction or not, do you have a plan? The adventurer from Mandrote asked, sitting back down on his cot. Oh, I have a plan. Otto reached up and wiped his face with his palm. You're not going to like it. It's not fleeing the camp in the middle of the night, is it? How many fire spells do you know? Otto leaned forward and interlaced his fingers between his knees. A couple? Why? You ever seen a troll made from wood before? I don't like where this is going. Norrie leaned back and braced himself with his arms, his eyes on the fabric over their heads. Neither do I. Otto waved Liam down to sit on his cot. He spent the next hour explaining his plan and convincing the rest of his party it wasn't suicide. Liam of Carcanne was written by Will Hansen. This chapter has been read for you by the author. If you've enjoyed this episode, why not leave a comment? I'd love to hear what you think. Likewise, every like, rating, and subscription helps. Liam of Carcanne is now available as a podcast on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, and all other major podcast distributors. Want more information on Liam or Will? Visit the Wooks Books YouTube channel, Facebook page, or website, all linked in the description. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next time.